So now, Mexico. So Mexico is a lot like Brazil in numerous ways. So pre-crisis, it improved its domestic economy quite a bit, put into place a solid economic framework, which includes both monetary policy and fiscal policy. So like Brazil, they decreased spending, decreased the deficits, decreased the debt load, shifted or increased the amount of public debt and private debt that's funded domestically. So like Brazil, the government had a lot more spending capacity going into the crisis, and the country as a whole was less exposed to external risk. But something that's quite different from Brazil is they did not have this focus on social spending in the run-up to the crisis. So when the crisis hit, there was nothing there to support domestic consumption. And you can see what a dramatic difference it made. So in 2009, the Mexican economy contracted by about 6%. So much worse than Brazil. But given the solid banking and financial regulation, the economy was able to bounce back very quickly. So in 2010, it grew at over 5%, and that's because it didn't have that debt overhang that the U.S. did. So why did it perform so poorly in 2009? So it wasn't for lack of stimulus. The country put into place fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus, loosened banking regulations. None of that mattered. It still contracted severely, and the reason for that is the country's excessive exposure to the U.S. So domestic consumption depends to a large degree on remittance inflows, and those inflows largely come from the U.S. So in 2009, when the U.S. went into recession, those flows dropped, and there were no social spending programs, or to a lesser degree, didn't have those programs to support domestic consumption, so it contracted by over 7%. And also, Mexico is much more open than Brazil, about 3 times as much. Exports account for over 30% of GDP. So when the U.S. went to recession in 2009, since most of those trade flows are directed towards the U.S., when the U.S. went into recession, those trade flows collapsed. So between the collapse in consumption and the collapse in exports, the economy didn't have much of a chance. But going from 2009 to 2010, like I said, the economy recovered strongly, and it was largely due to the recovery in the U.S. So it was an export-led recovery. Consumption rebounded also because of the restarting of remittance inflows. And moving from 2010 to 2011, expect to see the growth rate drop from 5.5% to maybe 4.5%. So it's not as large as a drop as you see in Brazil. It's because the U.S. economy is still recovering and supporting growth. Inflationary pressures are weaker in Brazil, so you don't expect to see this withdrawal of stimulus to the same degree. So monetary stimulus will still continue to support the economy past 2011. And going forward from 2011 and to the future, like Brazil, like the region, expect to see similar growth rates unless the country can address a few key issues. And once again, it's this productivity issue, but with Mexico, they have relatively good infrastructure, and they also have a relatively good investment climate. So the major issue with Mexico is its poor quality of education. So if they really want to increase their growth rates to 5% and 6% and do that over an extended amount of time, they need to improve that quality of the education. And they should do it sooner rather than later. So in conclusion, I do not think the region has yet arrived, maybe contrary to what many people think. I think it's shown it's got great promise, it's got great potential, but if it wants to fulfill that potential, it's got to address its productivity issue. It needs to invest in human capital, it needs to invest in physical capital, and if it does that and it takes the opportunity it has now, I think the region has an extremely bright future. But if it doesn't take this opportunity, I think it will largely falter, and not much will come of the current opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Scott. We always have one speaker who draws the picture a little bit darker than we wished or expected, so I think we found the one today. We'll have a coffee break for 20 minutes.